Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. I got an email from Rita Miller, subject line, cognitive security. I thought that was kind of interesting. The body of the email says, Hi, Jared. I'm a fairly recent follower and have been listening intently to your podcast for the past couple months. Something I came across Something I came across recently has me concerned that I haven't seen you address, or maybe I've just missed it. I saw a clip of a post from the director of CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, talking about the importance of addressing the quote-unquote cognitive infrastructure as part of her focus on controlling quote-unquote misinformation. Since the government's focus on public-private partnerships with online media have proven so effective in controlling the ability of people to get and disseminate information on a global scale, her coming out and saying that our thoughts are the next frontier, quote-unquote, for this partnership seem to be taking things to a whole different level. Connecting that to the new global legislation coming out that seems aimed at nullifying our Bill of Rights, especially speech. And I'm wondering how we, as a free people, will be able to retain those freedoms. How do Christians, and more specifically Latter-day Saints, deal with this? Has this kind of demonic work been addressed before? This is part of the end times, I guess, but I haven't seen it in scripture that I know of. Thank you for the work you do. It's greatly appreciated in our little household. All right. Thank you, Rita, for the email. So this is quite the topic to tackle. And yes, I have done videos about this before. Let's do it like this. Let's go to, excuse me. Let's go to this thing that you're talking about, or at least this is part of it. I did a search. I came up with this, the weaponization of CISA. I've never heard of these people before, but I guess it's a thing. How a cybersecurity agency colluded with big tech and disinformation partners to censor Americans. Interim staff report of the Committee on the Judiciary and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, U.S. House of Representatives, June 26, 2023. Executive summary. This is a quote from CISA Director Jen Easterly, November 10th, 2021. Quote, one could argue we're in the business of critical infrastructure, and the most critical infrastructure is our cognitive infrastructure. So building that resilience to misinformation and disinformation, I think, is incredibly important. Okay, end quote. So this is like, I guess, the argument being made starting right here, like against that, or the dangers of that. The First Amendment recognizes that no person or entity has a monopoly on the truth, in that the quote-unquote truth of today can quickly become the quote-unquote misinformation of tomorrow. Labeling speech misinformation or disinformation does not strip it of its First Amendment protection. Sorry. As such, under the Constitution, the federal government is strictly prohibited from censoring Americans' political speech. The government also may not use third parties to bypass the First Amendment and conduct censorship by proxy. I think that's referring to like social media when they decide to, demonetize channels or block things, or whatever. Say something can't be posted because of its sensitive nature, or because they identify it as misinformation, or all those things. The Committee on the Judiciary and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government have been conducting an investigation into government-induced censorship on social media. Although the investigation is ongoing, information obtained to date has revealed that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, an upstart agency within the Department of Homeland Security, so that's where they're found. They're within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has facilitated the censorship of Americans directly and through third-party intermediaries. Founded in 2018, President Nelson's first year as president of the church, interestingly, CISA was originally intended to be an ancillary agency designed to protect quote unquote critical infrastructure and guard against cybersecurity threats. In the 3 years since its creation, however, CISA metastasized into the nerve center of the federal government's domestic surveillance and censorship operations on social media. So they if I'm understanding this right, they started out as, like it says here, they started out with the intent to guard against cybersecurity threats, but that somehow morphed into social media censorship. By 2020, CISA routinely reported social media posts that allegedly spread disinformation to social media platforms. By 2021, CISA had a formal dis, and malinformation or MDM team. Wow, MDM team, dis, or malinformation. Okay. In 2022 and 2023, in response to the growing public and private criticism of CISA's unconstitutional behavior, CISA attempted to camouflage its activities duplicitously, claiming it serves as purely, quote unquote, a purely informational role. The interim staff report details, among other things, that CISA is working with federal partners to mature a whole of government approach to curbing alleged misinformation and disinformation. CISA considered the creation of an anti-misinformation, quote unquote, rapid response team capable of physically deploying across the United States. And I don't know what that would look like, or like, because if they're mainly concerned with like cybersecurity, you'd think that they would just stay in like wherever they're headquartered and just work from there. So what does it mean to physically deploy? I don't know. If you have an idea of that, let me know. CISA moved its censorship operation sorry, to a CISA-funded nonprofit. They moved their censorship operation to a CISA-funded nonprofit after CISA and the Biden administration were sued in federal court, implicitly admitting that its censorship activities are unconstitutional. So that sounds like they moved their work to a non-government organization, but that was an organization, I don't know who, that was funded by. So it's like, okay, well, we're not doing it, but we're funding these guys. They're still doing what we were doing. CISA wanted to use the same CISA-funded nonprofit as its mouthpiece to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. Yikes. Members of CISA's advisory committee agonized that it was only a matter of time before someone realizes we exist and starts asking the world about our work. The committee and the select subcommittee are responsible for investigating, quote, violations of the civil liberties of citizens of the United States, end quote. In accordance with its mandate, this interim staff report on CISA's violations of the First Amendment and other unconstitutional activities fulfills the obligation to identify and report of the weaponization of the federal government against American citizens. The work, however, is not done. CISA still has not adequately complied with a subpoena for the relevant documents, and much more fact-finding is necessary. In order to better inform the committee's legislative efforts, the committee and select subcommittee will continue to investigate CISA's and other executive branch agencies' entanglement with social media platforms. So, look, this really isn't anything new. And what I mean is, what we're talking about is control, manipulation through, in the sense of like manipulating people psychologically. Okay. They're using the guise, misinformation, disinformation, which in some cases may actually be true. This is like, oh, stick with me. I'm gonna explain my view on this, and I think that I'm right. So, okay, first, there's always been an effort to control the narrative. There's always been an effort to persuade the public. And we know this through different CIA programs, such as like MK Ultra and the military and intelligence communities involvement with Hollywood. This is like a well-known thing. It's well known. Okay. I'm not going to do like a thing about it here. There's other people that explain it a lot better. But just for example, in California, there was this really famous U.S. Air Force TV, like a like a film production studio in Laurel Canyon that was used for essentially propaganda purposes. And it's really famous for now. I can't really verify this, but like I feel like there's enough out there to suggest that not the Air Force, but like I suppose the CIA and other groups maybe were using it to try and control the counterculture during the Vietnam years. So instead of like letting the counterculture or the opposition like get out of control, you essentially guide it. So you kind of like get your hands in it, you influence it, you turn it into your own thing so that it's controllable. That makes sense, right? But is that constitutional? I probably not. I don't think so. So you have that kind of thing going on, and there's always been the idea of propaganda. That's not a new idea. And I'm not an expert. I'm not like a historian, but I'm sure that there's always been this aspect of psychological operations in the past, both trying to control your own population, but also to influence an enemy territory's population. So it's not really new. And this is where we get into this kind of more recent phenomenon of color revolutions. I'm going to get into that, where essentially what you do is you help foment unrest in a nation that you're interested in, that you want things to change in that nation. So you help the side that's aligned with your side conduct a revolution, or you instigate a civil war, or it depends on what the nation is and what your goals are in the groups that are in the nation and how you can manipulate them, leading to a color revolution. So okay, so we'll get into that in just a minute. I have some more to share. Before we get into more about like cognitive infrastructure and color revolutions and all this stuff. You asked, what can we do about this? The answer is this. This is found in The Power of Spiritual Momentum by President Nelson. Excuse me. This was his main... Wait, was this his... Yeah, this is April 2022. This was his main talk of the April 2022 General Conference. And he says, "We are followers of the Prince of Peace. Now, more than ever, we need the peace only he can bring." Okay? So if we're talking about world peace, if we're talking about fighting back against these different things, we have to understand this. Now, more than ever, we need the peace only he can bring, meaning Christ and his gospel. How can we expect peace to exist in the world when we are not individually seeking peace and harmony? Brothers and sisters, I know what I'm suggesting is not easy, but followers of Jesus Christ should set the example for all the world to follow. I plead with you to do all you can to end personal conflicts that are currently raging in your hearts and in your lives. So look, let's talk about this. This ties into this as well. And this is one of my favorite scriptures in the Book of Mormon. 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 14. And now, my sons, I speak unto you these things for your profit and learning. For there is a God, and he hath created all things, both the heavens and the earth, and all things that in them are, both things to act and things to be acted upon. That is a key concept in what we're going to talk about. So in in the secular world, in science, the way that they view things is like this. You have an event that takes place, call it X. And when that takes place, it affects the next thing in the chain. And you have this like chain of causality, right? So, for example, a bear eats a squirrel and now that squirrel cannot reproduce, or maybe that squirrel has baby squirrels that are now affected by that bear. And then that's going to lead to a new set of circumstances. But there's just like this endless chain of causality where, you have this affects this and this causes this and this causes this, and it goes on. And that's like one of the big philosophical debates is like, how did this start? Is this like infinitely going backwards and infinitely going forwards? Well, the answer is yes, but people that aren't members of our church or people that don't have God, it's a big mystery. Like, how did everything start? And they're trying to figure that out. So you have this that's going on, and this is going on. But what we know as members of the church, and I think most other religions would be on the same page, it's not all strictly causality. Like, you don't have all these things. It's not like the entire world is nothing but things that are acted upon. That's what secular people would have you believe, that, everything's you're just the next chain in the cause, in the chain. You're the next link in the chain of causality, and there's nothing you can really do. You're shaped by your circumstances, and you don't really have freedom. You just have the illusion of freedom. And so it's just this big, dead, lifeless chain of things that are acted upon, including yourself. But that's not what we believe. We just read it in the Book of Mormon. So there are things like this. Let's say that X is something that is acted upon. But in our understanding, through Christ and through the gospel, and having a true understanding, there is X, but there is also, we'll just say O, things that are the things that act, the things that act upon the things that are acted upon. Is there the thing that acts upon the things that are acted upon? Yes. So you have this thing right here, something that is not necessarily part of the chain of causality. It's something that is like above it. So this can produce this, or it can produce this, or it can produce this, because it is something that acts, not something that is acted upon. And what you'll notice when you read the scriptures is you come across the concept of the natural man. And the natural man is a thing that is acted upon, right? The natural man is X. But we are both the natural man because we have our bodies are the natural man, our natural inclinations that are associated with our physical bodies. So we have X within us, but above X is something that acts. So what happens is the Lord gives us the commandments, and the commandments are contrary to the natural man. The natural man just wants to be part of this endless cycle of chain cause and effect, right? If all you had was the natural man and not a spirit, it would just be a thing that's acted upon, and it would just be part of this great chain that spreads throughout all the universe. Okay, and the natural man is geared, it's designed to survive in this world, in like the physical world. So it naturally wants to compete for resources. It wants to compete for mates. It wants to compete for food and, safety, shelter, things like that. That's what it's geared to do. That's just its programming. Well, a lot of times that is appropriate, but other times it is not. Like, it's not okay to kill people so that you can have that source of food, or so you can have that mate, right? So the Lord gives us laws that are contrary to the natural order of things, or like the natural man's way of things. And it doesn't make sense to the natural man. And that's why we struggle, because, somebody does something bad to us, and the natural man, the natural response is to get angry back at that person and maybe try and bring justice to that person to settle the score. But the Lord teaches us how we should act. And so when we follow the commandments, we rise above the chain reaction and being a thing that acts. So let's say that this is an actor right here, an actor with a natural man, a spirit and a body. And if this individual chooses to live the gospel, which does not make sense to the natural world, and it does not make sense to the natural man, then you rise above this chain reaction, and you go according to this higher way of living, of things that act. So instead of being an animal, you are a human being. Now, the problem is that everybody in the world is endowed, is endowed with both a body and a spirit. And some people choose to obey the commandments, but other people don't. What they do is, even though they have the potential to be something, a thing that acts, they yield to the natural man. So instead of being this right here, they basically turn themselves, or their spirit yields, their spirit hides or gives everything over to a lifeless thing, the natural man. And then, of course, because they're yielding to the natural man, then they just merge into the chain of causality, and they're affected by the things around them. And they're not being a thing that acts. They turn themselves into something that is acted upon. And it's been my observation that narcissists and psychopaths, and I'm not, you can have whatever your opinion is if you're a psychologist or whatever. I think that these people, I know that science has their way of explaining them. Okay. But I believe that this is a group of people, like, let's just throw out narcissists, like people that are more prideful. Okay. People that are more prideful tend to be more on the side of the natural man. Right? Doesn't it make sense? And I think what happens is some people come to this life and they experience the trauma of life. Everybody experiences trauma to one degree or another. And some people, okay, let me clear this out. Hold on. Let's start over. Okay. So for example, you have these two people. You have this person, you have this person. They're born to the same family. They experience the same trauma because they have the same family. And some people, they will, in order to, they realize that what they need to do to protect themselves, or what they think they need to do to protect themselves, is they need to become just as bad, just as vicious. They need to give themselves over to the natural man, because the natural man is really good at protecting that person, in the worldly sense. And so some people descend when they come across that trauma, and they give themselves over to the natural man and therefore become a thing that acts. Whereas other people born in the same family hold on to their soul, and they don't descend to those depths, and they, maybe partially, but then they rise above it, and they remain a thing that acts instead of something that is acted upon. So these people down here, I believe, become prideful because the natural man is a prideful thing. It's a narcissist and sometimes a psychopath. And it's geared toward competing with other people and rising to the top of the pecking order and competing for resources. And and it also becomes very delusional, because part of the natural man's defense is to portray themselves as something that they're not. Okay, because appearance is a great way to defend yourself. If you can get other people to believe that you're something that you're not, then it's a protection, you know. And people have all sorts of different ways to do that. Sometimes maybe for some people, uh, they just have like a natural inclination to be like fit, you know, or maybe they're like just really pretty, sexy, whatever, and so they leverage that to get attention and thereby feel better about themselves and feel like they have control. Other people, it might be their mind. They're really smart, and so that's how they create their facade. And it makes them feel better about themselves. It protects them emotionally and whatever. So this group down here, they're subject to cause and effect because they are not acting. They're being acted upon because the only one in control of this person is the natural man. And so they get into all these different behaviors, pride, facades of who they really are. They have magical thinking. They don't really have core values. They may look like they do. So for example, one person may be like, oh, you know, I get a lot of attention. I'm pretty good at looking religious. So you have some people that become priests or whatever because that's like their knack, is they know how to get attention and power and influence and respect and whatever by being a priest, for example. So this is where you have the real thing up here. You have things that act, that are obeying the commandments, and they have their natural man under control, more or less, by living the commandments. And then you have these things down here that are not in control, and they've yielded to natural law and the natural man and all that stuff. And anyway, I was going somewhere with that. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so this is basically all you need to know for us moving forward. So look, Rita, when you say, what can we do? What you can do is be a real thing and not a fake thing, because these fake things right here can be manipulated. They can be manipulated because you can predict what they're going to do. It's really easy to manipulate a narcissist. They are the ones that are the most susceptible to manipulation because they have natural thinking, and they're very, very, very predictable because they all have the same playbook. And so there's people higher up that I think realize that, and they know how to manipulate prideful, narcissistic people. Just like an example. So what you do is one of their tendencies is to cross boundaries because it's all about control and power. Like, you're not going to tell me to do that. I can do whatever I want. And so if you want this person right here to do something that you want them to do, then maybe you tell them the opposite. You say, you cannot do this. You cannot do this. This is against the rules. Knowing that there's certain of this, like, of course, this would be based on like studies. You'd like study a population and you'd look at a certain subsection and be like, oh, if we tell these people no, they're definitely going to do it. So let's tell them no. And then them being dummies are like, no, you're not going to tell me to do that. I'm going to do that anyway. And then they do exactly what you want them to do. That's just like one very simple form of manipulation. Okay. There's other forms too, you know. For example, you give permission for people to act badly. And I feel like we've seen a lot of that recently with things going on in this country where you have, I'm just going to say one concept. Let's say concept C right here. Concept C has always been viewed as bad. You know, you should not do this. This is bad. But then what you do is you make it okay for certain people. And you do that through social media, and then media, movies, TV shows, where you portray that, well, yeah, this is bad, but you over here, like it's okay for you to do it. And narcissists and prideful people who don't have values, that don't care about truth, they're like, oh, cool. now we can do this, like, and we're not going to get in trouble. So that's another way that you can manipulate them, is you make it seem like something's okay. They don't have true values in the first place. And so if you can create the narrative like, you know what, you're entitled to do that. You are entitled to do that. You deserve it. You deserve justice, and you have free reign. You can do whatever you want because this is owed to you. And so these natural man people who have no values, that don't care about truth, they're just the natural man, things that are acted upon. Then they're like, oh, okay, cool, we'll go ahead and do this. And so they do this thing. Does that make sense? So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate these natural man people. And there's more to it than that. So if we live the gospel, then we break that chain and we start creating a better world, and it can spread. If you want to really change the world, do this. Share the Book of Mormon. By the way, this is updated as of yesterday. 7,617 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. Let's keep marching forward and trying to get to 10,000. Good job, everybody. Okay, and then be a thing that acts, and you do that by living the gospel. Okay, now I was actually watching. So I came across your email yesterday, and on that same day, I was watching this. It just so happened that I was watching this video while I was taking a break. AI Tipping Point, full documentary, and this is a good video, by the way. I'll put the link for it in the description below. But they said something that kind of raised my eyebrows at the 15-minute and 20-second mark. Current AI systems can engage in extremely complicated, diverse behavior that can compete in social games that requires the ability to mind read. Now, it's not talking about like literally reading your mind, like through like telepathy. It's not that. If you understand how AI kind of works right now, you have these, I think they're called large language models, like ChatGPT. It's not like intelligent. What's happened is it's looked over an entire set of data, a really, 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 really large set of data, say like everything that's open publicly on the internet. And then maybe it's been given access to people's Facebook accounts. And so it's like read through all those things. So it's like gone through like everything, more than a human can go through. And then what it does is it just tries to predict what the next thing should be. So like if you ask a question, you're like, hey, what is the best college to go to, or something like that, or what's the best college to go to in business or something. Then all it does is it looks over all that data, and then it tries to guess what the best answer would be. It doesn't know why. It's basically just like statistics. It's just like, oh, this is probably the next thing. This is probably what I should say, right? And like I was just saying, you have these people, these essentially dead, empty people that are just the natural man. They're very predictable. And you have all this data about them on the internet and on Facebook and other places where you can mine that data. And so then an AI would be able to be like, oh yeah, you do this, they're definitely going to do this. You say this, they're definitely going to say that. You understand what I'm saying? AI can probably be a better predictor of what these dead people are going to do and how they're going to respond and how they're going to react and what they're going to say and stuff like that. And so continuing, it says, okay, so let me read that again. So current AI systems can engage in extremely complicated, diverse behavior. They can compete in social games, or in other words, real life, that requires the ability to mind read. And then it goes to this next person, to a lady, and she says, imagine people who want to polarize a particular country. We see this a lot in our country right now. And so they want to crank out a lot of social media posts that look like news, or that that look like that look like fact if you add AIS and bots, and they can amplify it by millions, hundreds of millions. This could become relevant potentially in the next election, and that might end up excuse me, creating some unfortunate dynamics where some candidate who wouldn't normally get popular became very popular because they knew how to wield this type of technology. Very well, you can see that that technology could become extremely damaging and dangerous in many political contexts. Then you plunge people into civil disorder, kind of like what we saw in 2020, civil disorder, and also all throughout the world. And you lose any sense of personal security in a country or a place, and that just ruins everything that is going on. And this is very disturbing. So basically, right now, they do have the ability to come up with plans and influence people and manipulate people. But can they do it if you're a thing that acts? Can they do it if you're a thing that has true values? No, because nobody can take away your agency. You know, maybe you could be kind of tricked a little bit, but like fully manipulated, I don't think so. These people, the dead people, yeah, they can. They can definitely be manipulated. They can be both tricked and manipulated. But it's harder to do that with somebody but it's harder to do with somebody that's real. Someone that has core values, people that know what is right and what is wrong, how to act and how not to act. So, let's see, maybe next what we should do is we should talk about color revolutions. Okay. And the thing about this is, like, I don't think you can say, oh, you know, we are doing it to the rest of the world, or Russia is doing it to us, or China is doing it to us in this country. It's just like any other weapon. It's not like, oh my gosh, Russians, they have nuclear bombs or they have nuclear weapons, and oh, that's so horrible. Well, we have them too. And so does China, and so does Israel, and so does France and the UK and India and Pakistan. Everybody has this. And everybody's trying to use it against each other. So it's not like just one nation. And so you kind of have a problem. So in some cases, yeah, there's got to be maybe some kind of protection against outside influence on a country. Like, we don't want other countries influencing the United States. But at the same time, on our side, who's in control of the, you know, fighting back against them? Because this is like, we're talking about principles and politics and information. And just like that first thing that we read said, it said, I'm going to read that again. The First Amendment recognizes that no person or entity has a monopoly on the truth, and that the spread of truth of today can quickly become the misinformation of tomorrow. So who gets to decide those things? That's why this is like so complicated. You have another country trying to influence us, trying to incite chaos in our country. But again, who's to tell you what's right and wrong? Like, that's up to you. We have the Constitution, of course, but that's why this is like all just like very sticky. And it's like, it sounds good, like having an agency to combat outside influence from other countries. But what if they are using their own philosophy? That who's to say that they're right to do that? Who says that the others, you get what I'm saying? So let's go to this article, which I've covered before. This is from CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Russia in the Color Revolution. This was published May 28th, 2014 by Anthony H. Kordsman. Okay. A Russian military view of a world destabilized by the U.S. and the West. Which, by the way, I'm not taking their point of view. I'm actually not taking really anybody's point of view, because I feel like the entire world is essentially corrupt. There are good elements and there are bad elements everywhere. There are secret combinations. that have their own goals and agendas. So the world is very complicated, right? So I agree with this article that we, the United States and the West, do this, but I think that they do it too, and so does China, and so does everybody else. So I'm not like, okay, so hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. The British strategist Little Hart stressed the need to understand rival views of grand strategy and military developments, or the other side of the hill, quote unquote. A range of Russian and Belarusian military and civil experts presented a very different view of global security and the forces behind it at the Russian Ministry of Defense's third Moscow Conference on International Security on May 23rd, 2014. The first session of the conference presented an overview of the security situation, focusing on what Russian experts called the quote-unquote color revolution. Okay. Russian analysts have used this term since the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2012, in discussing the Orange Revolution in Ukraine 2004 and the Tulip Revolution that took place in Kyrgyzstan in 2005. Russian military officers now tied the term color revolution to the crisis in Ukraine and to what they saw as a new U.S. and European approach to warfare. Right? Information warfare. That's what this is. It's what we've been talking about. And I think specifically using social media and AI and things like that to manipulate the dead people, the zombies essentially, in other people's countries. Okay. Approach to warfare that focuses on creating destabilizing revolutions in other states as a means of serving their security interest at low cost and with minimal casualties. Yeah. Is it really necessary? Like in some cases it is, but is it necessary so much anymore to like go and force somebody to change their government or to comply with whatever you want them to do, when you can just use the internet and social media and these tools to get them to do it themselves? That way nobody has, like, your soldiers, your people don't have to die. Just get them to kill themselves. Get them to fight against themselves. Easy. And it seems like it's somewhat effective, by the way. Okay, it was seen as posing a potential threat to Russian in the near abroad, to China and Asia states not aligned with the U.S., and as a means of destabilizing states in the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and South Asia. And by the way, we saw that in the Arab Spring, which to some people was just like this phenomena, like this is so weird that this is happening. Essentially, it's this like rash of revolutions and civil wars and uprisings that took place starting with Tunisia in 2010. And then it spread to other countries, Algeria, Jordan, and you can see the map right here. Here's the map. Okay. And so it was like a magnificently large and probably somewhat, I don't know how successful it was. I guess it depends on what the goal was for each country, but essentially there was like a large, wide scale change that could have been accomplished by conventional war, but instead was accomplished through the color revolution techniques. Again, using internet, social media, and there's probably other things too. It's probably not just simply the internet and social media. There's probably other methods that you use as well. But all that changed all these countries right here. Look at all of them. So, okay, so purple, Egypt and Yemen, government overthrown more than once. Black in Tunisia, government overthrown. Red, we have Libya and wait, what did I miss? Okay, so this is Tunisia, and then this is Libya. Libya, civil war, and then Syria, civil war, which is still ongoing as of today. This like greenish color, like teal, protest and government changes. here in Morocco, Jordan, the West Bank, Kuwait, Bahrain, and then this is Oman, right? I think that's Oman. This like orangish color, major protests, Iraq, and whatever, and then minor protests in Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and so anyway, so a lot of stuff happened, all with a bunch of different results, but this was like this huge thing. So let's go back to what Russia's saying. It was seen as posing a potential threat to Russia in the near abroad, to China and Asia states not aligned with the U.S., and as a means of destabilizing states in the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and South Asia. The second session repeated these themes, focusing on the instability in the Middle East. In the final session addressed the war in Afghanistan and South Asia, because the Afghanistan war was still going on at that time. Key Russian officers and officials presented a view of the U.S. and the West as deliberately destabilizing nations in North Africa, the Middle East, and the rest of the world for their own ends. They described such actions as having failed and been a key source of terrorism. They see the West as rejecting partnership. Okay, they see the West as rejecting partnership with the West as a threatening Russia along. This is kind of okay. There's some like typos and stuff. As threatening Russia along all of its borders with Europe. Senior Russian officials are also using the term color revolution in ways that are far more critical than in the past. For example, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the United States and the European Union of an attempt to stage yet another color revolution in Ukraine. And said during the conference that, quote, attempts to impose homemade recipes for internal changes on other nations without taking into account their own traditions and national characteristics, to engage in the export of democracy, have a destructive impact on international relations and result in an increase of the number of hotspots on the world map. And it does appear that the war in Ukraine right now has to do with this. This is the Russian point of view. The Russian point of view, let's pull up Google Earth, is that its adversaries, the United States and the West, have this new way of manipulating countries and, in some cases, overthrowing their governments. And they're targeting countries that would be more under the influence or in the sphere of influence of Russia. Like these former Soviet states like Georgia and, of course, Ukraine. And so I'd probably be a little bit worried about that too. Right? I'm not saying anything about the invasion being justified or anything like that, but you can see probably the game that is actually being played right now. And for the better part of this century, where there's this new type of warfare. It's spreading across the globe, and everybody is doing it. Russia's doing it. China's doing it. Probably every country in some way or another that has the capabilities are doing it and trying to do it. Right? And so with that in mind, with like these color revolutions, you have to wonder about things like what happened in the United States in 2020, where there was a color revolution where people were given permission to, like I was saying before, where C, the hypothetical principle C, is viewed as bad, but now people were given permission to view it as okay. They're an exception, and it's okay for them to go ahead and just, seek justice, And whether that was caused by an outside influence, like from another country, I don't know. There are secret combinations, and I wouldn't be surprised if a secret combination within the United States was doing that to the United States for their own goals. But you have to wonder about these uprisings and stuff like that. And there's a lot going on right now, both in the United States and the Western world, where you have these really large protests in support of the Palestinians that have gotten really violent and really kind of outrageous in a lot of cases. And those are popping up all over the West. And you have to wonder if those are so organic, or if maybe Russia and other countries are inspiring those to take place. In fact, I think it was on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day in Berlin, there was a big protest that was going on. Let's see, Palestinian protest, Berlin. Oh, gosh, not with an E. Okay. Police in Berlin ban pro-Palestinian New Year rally. I was seeing like a bunch of stuff about this on X. Anyway, I'm not going to go over that, but this happened. There was also a group that was going to try and like disrupt the Times Square New Year celebration. They were like marching on that, but I don't think that they were successful. But anyway, let's continue. Western experts can argue the degree to which this represents Russian anger over the West's actions to... Okay, actually, I'm not going to read that part. Sorry. I was debating on that before. I'm not going to read that. And then you have this, who knows, if this is true or not. I think that it probably is. This is from Salon, 7 countries in 5 years. I've shared this a couple of times. And this is kind of stunning if it's true. Okay, so this has to do with General Wesley Clark, okay? In A Time to Lead for Duty, Honor, and Country, published by Palgrave Macmillan last month, the former 4-star general recalls 2 visits to the Pentagon following this event right here. On the first visit, less than 2 weeks after this thing happened, he writes, a senior general, quote unquote, told him, quote, we're going to attack Iraq. The decision has basically been made, end quote. 6 weeks later, Clark returned to Washington to see the same general and inquired whether the plan to strike Iraq was still under consideration. The general's response was stunning. Quote, oh, it's worse than that, he said, holding up a memo on his desk. Here's the paper from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, then Donald Rumsfeld, outlining the strategy. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. And he named them, starting with Iraq and Syria and ending with Iran. While Clark doesn't name the other 4 countries, he has mentioned in televised interviews that the hit list included Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. And by the way, all of which have seen color revolutions. So I think that was actually real, because that's what actually happened. Maybe not with troops on the ground, boots on the ground, but via color revolution. So if you take this entire map and then you add Afghanistan, and then Iraq is already on here, there's been a lot going on in Africa and the Middle East. And it seems to be as the result of these plans, possibly of secret combinations, I would guess. I have reason to believe that, but I'm not going to go into all that. It's kind of beyond the scope of this channel. And yeah, so you have this going on, and surely you have other countries pushing back. So again, I'm not too worried about it. It's like scary that we've reached this level of warfare, but you can still control yourself, and you can make sure that you're a thing that acts and not a thing that is manipulated. And you do that by reading the scriptures, listening to the prophets and the apostles, living the commandments, developing within yourself the ability to be a thing that chooses, because the more you live the gospel, the more free you are from the infinite, well, I say infinite, but what seems to be the endless cause and effect that's going on in the universe. So, and we know ultimately the great, I think they call it the great mover, or the one at the end of the chain, is God, obviously. It's God the Father. He's the one, he is that which acts upon all things and sets things into motion. And you can get more complicated with it. You can get into philosophical debates and stuff like that. But ultimately, that's what it is. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to be these little things that act and become like our Heavenly Father, something that really acts in affects, that controls everything within his sphere. And we'll have our own spheres, our own worlds, our own whatever. And I guess I just want to end on this. There's this article from Reuters. Putin says Russia must prevent color revolution, which gives a little bit more about that. But I'm going to move on. And I want to finish on this. This is from, I don't know how you OODA Loop. Cognitive infrastructure worldwide is under attack in the worst cognitive warfare conditions since World War II. Yeah, because of AI and because of social media and because of the internet. Of course. They could only do so much in World War II. You could still have psychological operations and propaganda and stuff like that. But now, oh my gosh, we're at a completely new level. Okay, background. UDA CTO Bob Gorley describes, quote, a nation's cognitive infrastructure as including the mental capacities of the citizens and the decision-making ability of people, organizations, and our government. So that, according to him, that's what the nation's cognitive infrastructure is. The mental capacities of the citizens and the decision-making ability of people, organizations, and our government. Bob elaborates further in his framing of cognitive infrastructure. Quote, it also includes the information channels used to feed decision-making capabilities and the and the education and training systems used to prepare people and organizations for critical thinking. In a free society, it is the job of the citizen to decide what their role is in the cognitive infrastructure. Oh yeah, that's like obviously another big aspect of it, right? Is education, and I know everybody's very concerned about that. I'm not so much. I'm not. You know why? Because I, being a thing that acts, can teach my children right and help them become a thing that acts. And so these dead people that try and teach dead things won't be able to affect my children because I've taught them how to repel that. I think that homeschooling is great. We tried to do homeschooling ourselves, and I think it's great if you're doing it. But at the same time, if you can't do that or you don't want to, I wouldn't be so worried. Just teach your children. That's all you got to do. What do you think that Come Follow Me is all about? In Family Home Evening. And spending time with family. Family, isn't it about time? You can be a much, 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 much bigger influence on your kids than a teacher ever could be in a classroom. So if your kids end up becoming radicalized and they adopt these like leftist views and secular views and stuff like that, they do have their own agency. Even if you're like a really good parent, maybe you can't not necessarily prevent that because we're not going to force our kids, right? So some of them may just go that way anyway. But in all other cases, you have nobody to blame but yourself if you haven't spent time with your kids and you haven't taught them correctly and you haven't fostered a good spiritual atmosphere in your home. And you let your kids just like watch whatever they want to watch, and you don't read scriptures with them, and you're casual in your church attendance, and so on and so forth. And if you yourself are not fully a thing that acts, if you yourself are too much yielded to the natural man, then you have no one to blame but yourself. So you need to first work on yourself, and then you need to work on your family and teach them correctly. And that's how easy it is. That's the thing. It's like they can spend all this money and develop all this trickery and manipulation and psychological warfare, but you can easily thwart it by just simply being rooted in the gospel and being a real person, someone that's not easily manipulated. And then all that money comes to naught. And then if you help others around you to do the same, you share the Book of Mormon, you do member missionary work, you work on your family, you work on the people in your ward, then it easily and for free, it stops them in their tracks when they've spent billions of dollars in trying to figure out ways to manipulate you. So, and by the way, you know, I I can understand when you come across these concepts, you know, they're controlling our education, they're controlling social media, they're doing this and that. It's not good to be afraid. You know why? Because if you're afraid, you can be manipulated. People that are fearful can be manipulated because I know what you're afraid of. And so I just do the things that I need to do to scare you into a certain scenario. So stop being scared. That's something that I was taught really early on in the Army. Again, this was in basic training. In basic training, there was one day that it was like the end of the day. Everyone's getting ready for bed. Some of the drill sergeants were still downstairs, and one of my battle buddies had to go down there and talk to one of the drill sergeants about something, and I needed to too. So I went with him. We went downstairs. He was talking to the drill sergeant, and at that time I was still I was scared. They can be kind of scary at times, and this one drill sergeant was like watching me, and when it was my turn to talk, like I was talking in a very respectful, very just kind of like humble way. And the drill sergeant was like, "Stop being scared." And that hit me. I took that to heart from that point on. And I did stop being afraid of so many things because it limits you. Fear is good to keep you alive. Like, oh, you're in a high place, be careful, don't fall. Or, oh, there's a snake over there that could be venomous. So that's good. But then that's like its proper role, and it shouldn't go beyond that. Because if it goes beyond that, it starts to paralyze you, and you start to become a person that's easy to manipulate. So stop being afraid. Trust in the prophet, trust in Christ, trust in the scriptures, and you'll be fine. You know, the Lord he's the one right here. He's the one that's in control of everything. He's the one that's in control of everything. Satan is limited. You know, they can carry out their plans, but only to a certain extent. So stop being scared and be hopeful and have your hope rub off on other people. That's what you should do. You should live the commandments. You should keep the commandments. You should teach your children. And then you should not be you should not be scared and then get other people scared at the same time. Because that works, that works in the enemy's to the enemy's favor when you do that. Okay, so now I just want to end on this. Oh yeah, I want to continue with this. Sorry. Quote, the U.S.-based efforts, which most closely resemble the working definition of cognitive infrastructure protection offered by Bob back in 2019, include the short-lived CISA website Rumor Control. So they had a website called Rumor Control to address disinformation associated with the 2020 United States presidential election, in the analysis and recommendations made by the recent Aspen Institute Commission on Disinformation Disorder final report. To date, the problem continues to dwarf any viable, holistic solutions and appropriate governmental responses of any scale. Yeah, and I don't know how you could possibly... It's like Pandora's box. I don't think there's any way to fight this. because truth is under debate. It's like that's what people are arguing about. You have this country or this regime that's trying to tell you that this is truth. You have this secret combination affecting this country that's trying to convince you that this is the truth. Again, President Nelson told us how and where to find the truth. He talked about that in General Conference. So you have these different groups and people in power trying to push forward their own goals, trying to manipulate the narrative to get you to do things that are in favor of what they're trying to do. So it's all just like a big cluster mess right now across the world. And I don't know that anybody is really too concerned with the truth. I think that they have their goals, they have their worldview, and they're trying to obtain their worldview. And who cares about the truth? You just manipulate it, to your own ends. So I don't think there's any way to stop this. The only way to stop it is for the second coming to come. And you stop having these these dead people that rise to the top, that they themselves are beneath the great dead person, Satan, right? And you have like the pyramid of dead people, and each dead person is trying to get as high up as they can in the pyramid. And that's all that they care about. They don't care about truth. So, okay. Oh gosh. It took from 2007 to 2018 for cybersecurity to get top billing in the creation of CISA. Is it time for the establishment of an independent National Cognitive Infrastructure Directorate? What do you mean? Like independent of the Department of Homeland Security? Like have it be its own branch? Is that what you? I don't. How would that help? What would that? Would that change things? I don't know what you're talking about. Back in 2020, the Swedish government concluded it was time for just such a governmental entity. In May of 2021, Sweden committed to a new authority to develop and coordinate psychological defense, including, quote, the establishment of a national center for psychological defense within the new authority, whose main task will be to develop, coordinate, and strengthen the national ability to identify, analyze, and face undue information influence. End quote. In October 2021, the Swedish government appointed a Director General of the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, Henrik Landerholm. The agency will have a complex operation with contacts with both the military defense and civilian authorities. The report, which called for the establishment of the new agency, also contained a proposal that the authority should be an information entitled Total Defense Authority and thus be able to target signals intelligence. Okay, so I guess they created that freestanding agency or whatever. Later on, facing a tsunami of disinformation about the treatment of Muslims that has in recent months fueled protests from Stockholm to Baghdad, Sweden decided it needed to fight back. Okay, you see this? So you have a hostile nation to Sweden. They're hostile towards Sweden, and they're able to manipulate those within the country that feel that they've been treated poorly and get them to rally together and cause chaos in Sweden. It's easy. It's easy. You know, there's that whole question too of people coming in from other places, how that changes the politics of the country, but also now that's a group of people that you can potentially manipulate from outside the country if you're trying to like attack that country, right? You go to them and you're like, you know what? Sweden hates you. They do. And they can't stand who you are or your religion. And they want to do this and this and that. And look how they are in their attitude towards this country. Like how much longer are you going to let them treat you like this and be second-class citizens? Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And it's probably like more than just that. But look at that. You know, and think about the situation of the United States and how these corresponding groups could also be manipulated. Okay, It turned to the Psychological Defense Agency, a part of the Ministry of Defense that its government created last year. The agency has become the first line of defense for a country facing a sustained information attack from abroad. The country's leaders are borrowing from an old Cold War strategy to steal the country's, like steal, S-T-E-E-L, to steal the country's 10 million people for the possibility of total war with the Soviet Union. Today's main threat, though not the only one, is the Soviet Union's successor state, Russia. According to the agency's officials, the Kremlin has targeted Sweden with a concerted online campaign on social media and elsewhere to discredit the country and undermine its bid to join NATO, the NATO alliance. Ah, look at that. Using these methods to try and get them to not join NATO. After working quietly behind the scenes, the agency has now explicitly accused Russia of exploiting recent protests by immigrants and others in Sweden that have included burning copies of the Quran in act of desecration that is deeply offensive to Muslims. The outrage has already had an impact, delaying Sweden's accession to NATO because of objections by another member, Turkey. Later on, the phrase cognitive warfare doesn't often appear in news stories, but it's the crucial concept behind China's latest efforts to use social media to target its foes. Recent stories have ranged from Meta's biggest single takedown of thousands of false front accounts on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and Substack to an effort to spread disinformation about the Hawaii fires to a campaign that used AI-generated images to amplify divisive U.S. political topics. Yeah, that's another thing. I think that you can obtain certain goals from dividing a population. Like if you're, if you're an adversary, then I'm sure a country is easier to attack or to manipulate if the country is divided because they're not unified. So they're like in a weakened state. And who knows what was actually going on in Israel this last year, 2023, when it was really divided over the judicial overhaul that was going on. Now, that may have organically happened anyway, but maybe to a lesser extent. It could be that some country from the outside that wanted to take Israel down, say Iran, maybe they, in some kind of way, amplified the division via social media, the internet, and whatever else. Okay, researchers and officials expect similar efforts to target the 2024 U.S. election. Oh, boy. Oh, my gosh. Oh, that's going to be one of the big things this year, 2024. Oh my gosh. Are we ready for this? Please let the second coming happen before that. It's probably not a good sign that November 2022, we had the first ever election day blood moon or lunar eclipse. First ever in U.S. history. Probably not a good sign that happened on election day. Okay, researchers and officials expect similar efforts to target the 2024 U.S. election as well as in any Taiwan conflict. Chinese government and military writings say cognitive operations aim to capture the mind, quote unquote, of one's foes, shaping an adversary's thoughts and perceptions and consequently their decisions and actions. Again, that's much easier to do with dead people that are just the natural man, people whose spirits are not controlling the natural man. They can be manipulated. Again, we can too, but I think to a lesser degree. Unlike U.S. defense documents and strategic thinkers, the People's Liberation Army puts cognitive warfare on par with the other domains of warfare, like air, sea, and space, and believes it key to victory, particularly victory without war. So again, color revolutions or just achieving your results by changing the enemy's mind. Social media platforms are viewed as the main battlefield of this fight. Social media platforms, the main battlefield, according to China. China, through extensive research and development of their own platforms, understands the power of social media to shape narratives in cognition over events and actions. When a typical user spends 2.5 hours a day on social media, 36 full days out of the year, 5.5 years in an average lifespan, it is perhaps no surprise that the Chinese Communist Party believes it can, over time, shape and even control the cognition of individuals and whole societies. A recent PLA Daily article lays out 4 social media tactics dubbed confrontational actions. 1. Information disturbance. 2. Discourse competition. 3. Public opinion blackout. And 4. Block information. just block it out. The goal is to achieve an invisible manipulation, an invisible embedding of information production to shape the targeted audience's macro framework for recognizing, defining, and understanding events. I'm assuming that means like you take a person's world, like the way that they view the world at large, and you try and like shape that, their macro framework for recognizing, defining, and understanding events. So instead of just like maybe like smaller things like individual events, you try and shape the entire thing, their entire way that they look at the world. I think that's what that's saying. Discourse competition. The second type is a much more subtle and gradual approach to shaping cognition. The authors describe a trolling strategy, spreading narratives through social media and online comments, gradually affecting public perception, and then helping achieve war or political goals. Here, the idea is to fuel the flames of existing biases and manipulate emotional psychology to influence and deepen a deserved narrative. The authors cite the incredible influence that invisible manipulation and invisible embedding can have on social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter in international events, and recommend that algorithm recommendations be used to push more and more information to target audiences with desired biases. Over time, the emotion and bias will grow, and the targeted users will reject information that does not align with their perspective. Yeah, that's another issue with the dead people, the narcissists and prideful, is they tend to not really have the ability to see the nuance in different situations. They're unable to see the shades of gray. They think in a very simplistic, childlike way that, for example, if you're thinking about group A over here, okay, in your group B, so the dead person is over here, then what they'll do is they'll assess group A. And if group A fits in with, whatever the individual wants, like they view group A as friendly or useful or whatever, then all of group A is good, right? All of them, they're all good according to this individual that can't think very well, that views everything in black and white terms. So but if something changes, okay, like if something happens over here with like part of group A that this person doesn't like, and they focus on this, then all of a sudden all of group A is bad. They're all bad. And it's a really stupid way to look at the world. It's really dumb, because for any given group, there's always good people and bad people. I always cringe when like people are like, for example, oh, I'm Italian, so that means I blah, 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 and blah, 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 or he's Italian, so he... That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Is that how things are in your area or in your country? Like everybody has the same preferences or way of living life? I mean, there are like traditions, there are certain things, but like some people, really think that way. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm Irish, and so, in those people are Irish, so they must like to do this." And that's not true. Any given country, any given group, there's a diversity within that group, even though they're the same people or the same group. You're going to have people within that group that think this way and that way and have this preference and that preference. And there might be kind of like a trend within the country, but it doesn't mean that it applies to everybody. So that's another thing that makes these people, oops, I better not draw a circle around it. That's what makes these people, another thing that makes these people easy to manipulate, because they think in very simplistic terms. And so if you can just get this side over here, whatever this side is, to look bad to this person, then it doesn't take much for them just to count the entire thing as bad, and no good can come out of this group. And that doesn't help, because the thing that bridges the gap is communication and compromise and understanding. And then you can get to a point where you both work it out. You compromise and you come to an acceptable solution. But if you're not willing to do that, then there's probably not going to be a solution. There's just going to be this big divide, this big polarization. So, all right, let's go back here. Okay. I think we're pretty close to being done. Sorry, I guess I had a lot to say about this. Quote, like many, I've recently been using social media to follow the war in the Middle East. As a habit, following news like this makes a certain amount of sense. Social media has often been one of the better sources for breaking information on emerging crises. Many aspects of this war are unique, but what is increasingly common is that my social media feeds, along with those of many others, are populated with extremely graphic images, many of which, having seen them, I fervently wish I could unsee. Yeah, that's what I was like at the beginning of the war, and I've said that on my channel. Yet, I still felt compelled to follow the news, to seek out ever more visceral videos and details of this unfolding human tragedy. I am far from alone in my exposure to this extreme content. And while it may seem like being an active, informed citizen requires such immersion in raw imagery, I am also a social psychologist and should know better. The effects of a traumatic event and the events in Israel and Gaza are certainly that. The effects of a traumatic event and the events in Israel and Gaza are certainly that, are, as we as psychologists well know, contagious. That is, their effects can spread well beyond their initial victims. In war, those victims include those who are displaced, injured, and killed, as well as those who have lost a loved one. The effects of a traumatic event are contagious. That is, their effects can spread well beyond their initial victims. The idea of secondary trauma recognizes that people indirectly exposed to an event like war can suffer as well. Take, for example, drone operators who endlessly scan live footage and take split-second orders to fire rockets at suspected terrorists, then commute home in time for dinner. Even though they are not physically exposed to harm, these immersive sensory experiences become associated with real trauma. That jarring disconnect, especially because it often goes unacknowledged, becomes its own form of trauma for people in critical roles, such as emergency rescuers, social media content moderators, law enforcement, and intelligence analysis. I'm starting to fall apart here at the end. Analysts. Secondary trauma was, for a long time, largely confined to people involved in the initial event, like first responders. Thanks to technology, however, it can now afflict anyone with a smartphone. And now, As graphic images from Israel and Gaza proliferate on social media, it is likely that these images are having significant negative impacts on the mental health and well-being of many, especially adolescents and young adults who already struggle mightily. So, it goes without saying that if you're able to spread these kind of like images and videos and stuff like that, it'll have an emotional effect on those people, and it can radicalize people, right? Because they see their side, right? Using the really dumb black and white thinking. So again, here's group A, here's group B, you're over here. Hopefully you're a thing that acts rather than is acted upon. But you have someone over here, a dead person, that sees a really graphic image or something coming from group A, and then, oh, that makes me mad. I can't stand group A because, that's my side. But guess what? There's ones on the other side too. Like, it's a conflict. People are suffering on both sides, people that are innocent. Not to say that there isn't a right or a wrong in whatever the conflict is, but you have to understand that there's a lot of people that don't want any part of it. And there's people on both sides that are suffering, and we have to try to understand that. You can still be on a side, but still be understanding toward the innocents on the other side, or maybe why side A feels the way that they do. Even though you don't have to agree with it, you can at least have understanding and empathy for them, and then maybe think of ways that this can be solved in another way. So, the dead people think like this. Hopefully people that act for themselves and are not acted upon can see the shades of gray, can understand the nuances and the complexity of the situation. And even though it's difficult and takes effort, come up with some kind of acceptable solution for both sides. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.